Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at the story from chapter 45 of the Road to Latin textbook. Now this story is called De Helvetiorum Profectione, and it's talking about literally the departure, right, of the Helvetii. So it's continuing a lot of what we've been talking about. These last few chapters in Road to Latin are really on De Bello Gallico, book 1. So you'll see a lot of similarities there, and it's meant to kind of prime you so you can go off and read Julius Caesar. So like I was telling in these videos, before we dive too far into the story, the first thing you want to do is take a look and try to gather up as much of the vocab as you possibly can, right? And if you need help with this, you can always take a look at my website, Nova Latin. You'll find everything you need in terms of vocab, grammar notes, videos, whatever it might be. But one way or another, make sure you have the vocab set, just because it's really hard to understand what's going on if you don't know what the words mean. So always start there. And again, there's a bunch of resources you can find on my site if you want a Quizlet or a Blue Kit or Gimkit. They're all open, so you can take them and practice and then feel ready to go. The second thing you want to do is you want to give a look at the grammar. I know sometimes you might want to dive into the story and then come back to the grammar, but I think in this case, for the last few chapters, it's much better to understand what's going on with the grammar because it's a little complicated, and you want to be able to use the story as a stepping stone to understand the grammar better, because the stories are set up in the reading method. So the idea is, as you read the story, you're getting a lot of practice with the grammar, right? You're seeing it in context of a story. So I'd always recommend that you try that. And again, if you want help with it, I have the notes from the original Road to Latin textbook, along with my own notes and some really great videos that'll bring these to life, right? We're talking about deponent verbs and the ablative absolute in this chapter. It's really important stuff. When it comes time to do the reading, I always encourage you to do the read and reread method. You've heard me say this a million times before, but you want to take the story, read it all the way through, write down any problem areas you have, and then when you're done, look at your list and see where you're going wrong. If it's words, that's probably vocab, right? That's pretty easy. Just look the word up. Use the dictionary either in the actual Road to Latin textbook or my website, and you can find it really easily. If it's grammar, it's probably the new grammar that's throwing you off, right? So that'd be a little bit trickier. Or you can go back if it's something that you're just not understanding. Look at the previous chapters, right? You'll probably figure it out. Or watch this video and you'll understand it too. But one way or another, you want to try to shore up those problem areas you're having, and then you go back and read the story again. And you repeat this process as many times as you need to, and you should be seeing your list of problems get smaller and smaller until you're able to read this entire story start to finish without writing anything down. You understood it all. That's how you know you're in a really good spot and you're ready to move on. And that repetition and practice will make you a lot better at Latin. Okay. The last thing I tell you to do, I always tell you to do in these videos, is read the story aloud. So if you can find someone in class, a classmate, to read it to, work on your speaking, your pronunciation. That's always a great thing. And then they can read the story back to you, and you can work on your listening skills. You never want to shut these off. It is possible, obviously, to read Latin and or to learn Latin and never speak it, but I think you're really shutting off important parts of your brain, right? When you learn a new language, you always want to try to speak it and hear it. That's pretty critical stuff for just any sort of second language acquisition. So you want to make sure that you're doing that. Okay. So if you haven't done any of that, pause the video, go back, work on it on your own. But moving forward, I'm going to give you a quick overview of the grammar, and then we'll dive into the story together. Okay. So the grammar goes like this, and this is not an in-depth sort of look into it. It's just to prime your brain. Hopefully you read through this. This might make it a little clearer if you're having trouble understanding it. But in this chapter, you're looking at deponent verbs. Okay, so it's a new variant of the Latin verbs we've seen. Deponent verbs are passive in form but active in meaning. That's what they are, right? And that sounds odd, but that is really what they are. Okay, so deponent verbs show up in all 4 conjugations, and the trick is they have 3 principal parts instead of 4. So when you're looking at them, you can kind of identify them very quickly because they have passive forms, if you're looking at the dictionary entry, and they only have 3 parts, right? That's how you know you're looking at a deponent verb. And they can still use direct objects, right? You can use them as normal verbs. It's not going to make a big deal. You just have to kind of get over that mental hurdle of seeing a verb that looks passive but is being translated actively. Okay, so here's some examples of what they look like. If you saw conor, conari, conatus sum, that looks weird, right? Well, the first thing you notice is there's only 3 pieces, not 4. So that's your first red flag. It's probably a deponent verb. And all of these are passive, right? So conor with the or, that's the first person singular present tense passive ending, right? The r is kind of a giveaway. And even the infinitive is passive. Instead of conare with an e, you're looking at conari, right? It has a passive infinitive there. And you have conatus sum, right, which looks like it should be a participle or something, but all that is perfect tense passive voice, right? So these are missing that 4th kind of participial form, and instead you're getting 3. These are all red flags that you're looking at a deponent verb, and there's a bunch of them in this chapter in the vocab that you saw. Conor is one, moror to delay, locor, right, to speak is a pretty common one. So that's how you can tell what's going on. So if you look at the dictionary entry, this is how you can kind of break it down. The first part is still the first person singular present tense, but it's got a passive form, right? That we just said that with konor, but you translate it actively, okay? But again, since it's a deponent verb, we're going to translate it actively. So konor is not translated as I am being tried or something like that. It just means I try. Okay. Same with konari. It's a present infinitive. It just happens to have a passive form. You still translate it actively. So konari is going to mean to try. The third part I said is going to be the first person singular perfect tense. It's using a passive form, right? Konata sum. But again, you're going to translate it actively. So konato sum means I tried. So this is how you can break down deponent verbs and understand what the different pieces are. It takes a little bit of practice for sure, but you're translating them actively. They look passive, you're still translating them actively. So if you look at how you conjugate deponent verbs on a chart, this gives you a good example of it, right? So this is an example of all the conjugations, right? And what it would look like. So you have conor, right? You have vereor, you have loquor, you have regredior, and you have experior, rather, right there. So this is what they look like. I'm showing you the infinitives. You can see the imperatives. We want to break that down for sure. You have the present, the imperfect, the future, perfect, pluperfect, future perfect, all the tenses. This is what you want to get used to seeing. And again, we don't have to go through this entire chart, but it's just the idea that they all have passive endings, but you're translating them actively. Okay, I'll repeat that over and over again because it is tricky to understand and to get used to. But once you, kind of run through these in a vocab list and you get used to seeing them, it'll be easier to understand. If you ever get stuck and you're looking at a verb and you're just not understanding, if it feels like it shouldn't be passive, right? Look it up in a dictionary and you'll be able to very quickly tell, like, oh, this is a deponent verb. Got it. Okay. So the other part of the grammar is ablative absolutes. Now, this is a really important idea. I mean, deponents are important as well, but this is an important idea for reading historical Latin, right? So something like Caesar, right, which is what we're looking at, because it shows up so often, right? The ablative absolute is something that, again, sounds complicated, but once you get used to it, it's actually not too bad. And it just shows up everywhere once you get into the later stages of Latin in high school. But it's a phrase that's detached from the rest of the sentence, right? So that absolute part comes from the Latin word for literally being detached. So it stands apart, right? And so in other words, you could take an ablative absolute out of a sentence and it would still make sense, right? It almost functions in that sense as a clause, okay? And it's used to show time or circumstances of an action. That's one way to kind of describe it. Okay, but an ablative absolute is going to consist of either a noun, right, with a participle. That's the most common one, I would say, or it could go a noun with an adjective, or even a noun with another noun. But the trick is both of these words are going to be in the ablative case. That's what gives it away. So when you see a phrase that just doesn't feel like it's part of your main sentence and it's all ablative, and you're like, wait a minute, this is an ablative noun with an ablative participle, that's how you know you're looking at an ablative absolute. So there is some variation how you can translate it, but the generic translation for an ablative absolute is with X having been Y'd. X is your noun, Y is your participle, okay? When you come across an ablative absolute using two nouns, you're going to put the word being in there, right? With something being something. And I'll show you those as we go. There's a couple different variants. This is just sort of the generic look at it. So this is what it looks like in the Road to Latin notes. And the authors do a really good job of breaking it down. So I'm just including this because I think it's easier to use their chart than to rewrite my own. But there's some examples here, right? So these all come from the story. If you have omnibus rebus ad profectionem comparatis, right? You have this phrase of with all things having been prepared for the journey, right? Then you have Helvetii diem dicunt, right? The Helvetians name the day. So the Helvetii diem dicunt is your main phrase. That could be a sentence on its own, right? The Helvetii pick the day. Okay. Everything else is sort of background information telling you sort of the circumstance of the timing. Again, that's the ablative absolute. So omnibus rebus comparatis is your ablative absolute there. And you have ad profectionem for the departure, right? That phrase. But the main word is rebus, right? You have an adjective going with it, omnibus rebus. And then you have the participle, comparatis. That's where we're getting with X having been Y'd. So with all things having been prepared. Or like they put here, you could say when all things have been prepared. It doesn't really matter. There's a few ways to translate it, but that's the part that's standing out. Okay. And number two, you have Helvetii sperant. Okay. So the Helvetii are hoping, that, right? It's indirect statement. Then you have this phrase, dum norige duce, and then it continues with sequanos iter daturos esse. So the indirect statement here is Helvetii sperant sequanos iter daturos esse. So the Helvetii are hoping, or they hope that the sequani, right, there's your accusative subject there, will give permission to pass, right? They'll give permission for the journey. Now, what do you do with dum norige duce? Well, there's two words, dum norix, in this case dum norige, and you have the word for leader, duce, both ablative. That's fine. This is a noun and an ablative absolute. When that happens, you supply the word being, right? So that's why you have if or with dum norix being the leader, or you could say if dum norix is the leader, or they even have your under the leadership of dum norix. All of those are kind of getting at the idea of, the detached thought, right? So, as long as dum norix is the leader, we'll be able to pass, right? That's the ablative absolute. Then you have in number 3, Caesare invito. There's your ablative absolute, right? With Caesar being unwilling, invito. Or you could say, although Caesar is unwilling, it all works. The main phrase is Helvetii flumen transire conantur, right? The Helvetians try to cross the river, transire flumen. That's a normal sentence on its own. You could have just said, hey, the Helvetii try to cross the river, right? But it's adding more information with this ablative absolute, with Caesar being unwilling, the Helvetii try to cross the river. So it sounds a little tricky at first. I promise you it's not. I'll point them out as we go. The key idea is recognizing that you have this noun with, again, another noun or a participle on the ablative case. That's how you know you're seeing an ablative absolute, and it will feel detached from the main sentence. When you read Caesar, he loves these because it's a quick way of giving that background information. So you see these a lot. Okay, so as far as the grammar goes, the shortened version I just gave you, you want to go back and read through the textbook, but it's deponent verbs, ablative absolutes, and you're going to get a lot of them in this chapter story. So if you want to do more work on the grammar first, pause the video, go to my textbook. You'll find a bunch of different videos and notes, things that will help you unpack it, read through it, and then when you're ready, come back to the story, which is what we're going to do now. Okay? So story starts like this. You have post orgetorigis, mortem nihilo minus Helvetii consilia perficere conantur. Okay, that's the first part. So you're saying after the death of Orgetorix, right? So after the death of Orgetorix, the Helvetii, right? Nonetheless, nihilo minus, right? Nonetheless, they tried, conantur, there's our deponent verb, they tried to accomplish the plans, consilia perficere. Okay, so there's our first deponent verb, conantur, right? It looks passive, translative actively. Then it continues, and you have nam se maiore parte Galliae facile potituros esse sperant. Okay, so they want to keep going with the plans, for they hope. Here's our indirect statement. You have a head verb, right? Hoping, and we don't have a direct quote. So you're saying they hope that they say, that's my accusative functioning as the subject of the indirect statement, right? They hope that they are easily, facile, able, they're easily about to obtain, potituros esse is your future infinitive. So they're hoping that they easily will obtain, or they're about to obtain, the greater part of Gaul, maiore parte Galliae. So that's what they're hoping they're going to take over. Okay, so they're hoping that we'll keep going with the plan and take over the rest of Gaul. Again, this is Caesar's depiction of it. Then you have etaque cum omnibus copiis domo profecisci constituunt. Okay, so here you're saying they decided, right? So they decide, rather constituent, they decide to depart, right? To set out, proficisci, right? It's a deponent verb. You're looking at the infinitive there. So it looks passive, but it's not. It's just a deponent verb, normal infinitive, using this as a complementary infinitive, right? They decide to set out from home, domo, and they do this cum omnibus copiis, with all their troops. So they take all their stuff, their troops, their supplies, everything. They pack up their civilization, and they depart, right? They leave their home. Then you have sunt homines maximae audaciae, neque angustias itineris, neque hostes bellicosos verentur. So they are men or people, right? You could even say homines. They are men or people of the greatest boldness, maximae audaciae. So they're very brave and bold people. Okay. Then you have a neque, right? So neither nor. So you're saying verentur, there's our deponent, right? They fear. They fear neither the narrowness of the journey, the angustias itineris, right? The narrowness of the journey, nor their warlike enemies, right? So hostes bellicosos. So they're not afraid of anything. Okay, so they're saying, we don't care how narrow the path might be, the journey, how difficult it might be. We're not afraid. We're going to go, and it doesn't matter who we run into. Okay, we're not afraid of anyone. Then it continues. And you have ubi se ad eam rem paratos esse arbitrati sunt, opida sua omnia vicos omnes privata aedificia incendunt. Okay, and this is a famous part of the story here. So when, right, ubi, so when they judged, there's arbitrati sunt, that's your deponent, right? It looks perfect passive, it's perfect active, you want to translate it. So they judged, right? And it's a head verb, so we have an indirect statement happening here. So when they judged that they say, right, that they were prepared, right, where they were ready, you might say, paratos esse, when they judged that they were ready for this thing, ad eam rem, right, for this journey. So when they judged that they were ready for this, incendunt, they burned, they set on fire, they burned opida sua, omnia, rather. So they set on fire, they burned all their towns, opida sua omnia. They burned all their vicos, right, all their homes, you might say, even their little villages, everything. And they burned their privata aedificia. They burned all their private buildings. So everything they had, they burned. And when you read Caesar, you can understand why they're doing this, right? But the short version is it's like a point of no return, right? You can't go back if you have nothing to go back to. So it's a way of saying we're doing this, right? We're definitely leaving. Okay. Then you have finitimi eodem consilio uti et una cum Helvetiis proficisci constituum. Okay. So the neighbors decided, the finitimi, right, the people who live on their fines, on their borders. So their neighbors decided to depart. Proficisci, there's your deponent infinitive too. So they decided to depart, right, or actually you might even go to uti first. So they decided to use uti, again, utor, deponent verb, same thing, you're looking at a deponent infinitive. So they decided to use the same council, eodem concilio, the same council, and together, una cum Helvetii, so together with the Helvetii, they decided to depart, proficisci constituum. Okay, so together they decided to all set out. Okay, so even some of the neighbors are hopping on the bandwagon. Okay, then you have sunt omnino itinera duo. Okay, so here you're saying there are altogether or entirely, right? You might say there are only, is kind of one way to do it. There's itinera duo, there are two routes. You have unum angustum et difficile inter montem Iuram et flumen Rhodanum pertinet. Then you have alterum multo facilius per provinciam Romanam pertinet. Okay, so there's two routes here. One is narrow, angustam. So one narrow and difficult, difficile, right? So one of the routes is narrow and difficult. Inter montem Iuram, it means through the between or through the mountain range, the Jura mountain range. Again, it looks like the Jura mountain, but it means the range. It's not just one mountain, right? So one of them goes through the or between the Jura mountains, right? So you got to go through a mountain pass. It's the Jura mountains and the Rhone River. Right, and it's pertinent means extend. So you can say one, narrow and difficult, extends between the Jura mountains and the Rhone River, right? And another one, multo facilius, much easier, right? Easier by very much. So the other one, much easier, it pertinent, it extends through the provinciam Romanum, through the Roman province. Now, if you're looking at a map here, I think we'd spoken about this before. This is the region of southern France, right on the border of Switzerland, Lake Geneva in southern France. That's called the province, right? It's called Provence today for that region. That's the Roman province they're talking about, kind of that southwestern route. So they're saying there's one route that's really difficult, that's going to go through the mountains. And there's another route that's much easier, but it bumps into the Romans. And we've spoken about that in previous chapters, right? What are you going to do about the Romans? The Helvetii have said, oh, we've conquered them before, not a big deal. So the Helvetii are thinking they're going to be able to make it through, but Julius Caesar is going to be waiting for them. Okay? So now we continue the story. You have omnibus rebus ad profectionem comparatis Helvetii diem dicant. Now this is where we started in our grammar. This is an ablative absolute. You have omnibus rebus comparatis. There's our noun with an adjective, omnibus rebus, and our participle all in the ablative case. This is a detached thought. So you're saying with everything, omnibus rebus, with all things, having been prepared for the journey, right? Comparatis ad profectionem, having been prepared for the departure, the Helvetii, right? The Helvetii, they set the day. Literally, it says they like say the day, but it means they picked a day, right, of when they're going to leave. That's your ablative absolute. Okay? Then you have omnes policentor se eadie ad ripam Rodani conventuros esse. Okay? So everyone promised, so all the people, they promised that they would assemble, conventuro. So in this indirect statement, policento is your head verb. They're promising, saying something. Se is your accusative that's kind of functioning as the subject, and conventuros esse is your future infinitive. So you're saying everyone promised that they would assemble on that day, meaning the day that they picked, ea die, on that day. They'll assemble at the bank, right, at the Ripam, the bank of the Rhone. So saying, hey, on the day we pick, we're going to go to the Rhone River. We're all going to assemble, right? And this is where they're going to bump into Julius Caesar. So now we continue. If Caesar, his rebus nuntiatis, Roma proficiscitur, et maximis itineribus, there we go, in Gallium ulteriorem contendit. Okay, so you have Caesar, his rebus nuntiatis. Here's your ablative absolute, right? You can see you have rebus and nuntiatis. All of it is ablative, so you have noun and participle. It's an ablative absolute. It's a detached thought, and even the commas here kind of give it away. So you're saying Caesar, with these things, his rebus, having been reported, meaning once he found out about these, okay, what did he do? He proficiscitur, he departs, right? He set out from Rome, Roma, right? Notice the ablative, it's the name of the city, so from Rome. He set out from Rome, and with the greatest journey, maximis itineribus, with the greatest journeys, meaning going very fast, right? Very long journeys is what it means. He contended, he sort of hastened into Galliam ulteriorem. It means further Gaul. Now, this is a reference to what you see a lot called Cisalpine Gaul and Transalpine Gaul. One of them is on the sort of southern part of the Alps in northern Italy. That's Cisalpine Gaul, right? Gaul on this side of the Alps. Transalpine Gaul is talking about Gaul on the other side or across the Alps. And it's from the point of view of the Romans, right? So it's the same idea here when you say Gallium ulteriorem, right? Further Gaul, it means he's setting out into that region of the Roman province, okay, and going into Gaul. Then you have brevi tempore ad flumen Rhodanum pervenit. Okay, so in a short time or soon, he pervenit, he reached the Rhone River, the flumen Rhodanum, right? So in a short time, he's able to actually get to the Rhone River where everyone is going and where the Helvetii said they were going to assemble and cross. Then you have maximo militum numero conlato pontem qui est in Rhodano deleri iubet. Okay, so here again, you have an ablative absolute. So you have maximo numero conlato. So with the greatest number, maximo numero, and it's got an ablative in there, of soldiers, militum. So with the greatest of number of soldiers having been placed, conlato, meaning kind of arranged and set up, he ordered, right, iubet, he ordered the pontem, the bridge, right? So he ordered the bridge, and then we have a side thought here with the relative. The bridge, which is on the Rhone River, right? So in Rodano, meaning the bridge over the Rhone, he ordered the bridge deleri to be destroyed. Now that's a little tricky because that is not a deponent verb. That's just a passive infinitive. That's why we're translating it to be destroyed. So he orders that the bridge that we have here to be burned, okay? And this is his first kind of warning shot in the battle that's about to happen, okay? So now we continue, and you have Caesaris adventu cognito Helvetii celeriter concilium convocant, et legatos ad Caesarem nobilissimos civitatis mitum. So you have, again, an ablative absolute here, adventu cognito, right? So it's really adventu Caesaris. You have the genitive there. But it's saying, with the arrival of Caesar having been learned, cognito, right? Meaning when they heard about the arrival of Caesar. The Helvetii, right? They quickly called together, convocant, they called together, or assembled, you might even say, convocant. They assembled a council, concilium, okay? So they assembled like a council of elders to figure out what they want to do. And they sent miton legatos, they sent envoys, messengers, and they're nobilissimos, so most noble civitatis of the state. So it means like the most noble people they have, they sent them as messengers, is kind of the idea. Ad Caesarem, to Caesar. So they sent to Caesar the most noble messengers of the state, right? So they're sending these well-known Helvetians to talk to Caesar and kind of make a peace treaty. You have legati dicunt Helvetios Caesare volente iter per provinciam Romanam facere vele. So the messengers, the legati, right, the envoys, they say, right? So the envoys say or said, here we have a adverb. Someone's speaking, we don't have a quote, it's indirect statement. Okay, so they said that the Helvetios, the Helvetii, then you have an ablative absolute, Caesare volente, right? with Caesar being willing is kind of one way you can do that, right? So with Caesar being willing, that's our detached ablative absolute. They said that the Helvetii, right? They wanted to make vele facere. So vele is the infinitive that's going with our indirect statement. Facere is just a complementary infinitive going off vele. So the idea here is treat vele like our main verb. They wanted, treat facere like a normal infinitive. So they said that the Helvetii wanted to make an iter, a journey, per provinciam Romanum, through the Roman province. And again, they add in Caesare volente, right? If everyone's willing here, if Caesar's willing, this is what we want to do, right? So they're asking his permission. Then you have eis auditis, Caesar negat se posse iter per provinciam ulidare, okay? Ablative absolute, eis auditis. With these things having been heard, you might even say like having heard these things, Caesar denied, negat, right? He says no. He denied, and again, that's an indirect statement because he's speaking. He denied that he, say, was able, posse, to give, dare, right? So he denied that he was able to give an iter, a journey, per provinciam, through the province, to anybody, uli. So he says, I'm not able to do anything here, right? Which is kind of a lie. Then you have Caesari invito, Helvetii tamen flumen transire conantur. Okay, so with Caesar being unwilling, this is the line we saw before, he's not willing to let him do this. The Helvetii, however, they try to cross the river. Conantur is our deponent verb, transire flumen, they try to cross the river. Id facere non possant. This, id, right, they were not able to do. Non possant. They are not able, facere, to do this. So they try to cross the river. They are unsuccessful because Caesar attacks them in the real story. Okay? And then we finish with this paragraph. You have relinquitur unas per sequanos via. Okay? So una via, one road, through the Sequani territory, right? So in other words, relinquitur was kind of left. So there's one other route that they could take. Okay, so they have one road left, and it's per Sequanos, through the Sequani land, right? So in other words, this is the group we saw before that they were trying to make the conspiracy with, but that's the only route they have left. Then you have Sequanis invitis autem, ire non potuerant. So with the Sequani being unwilling, invitis, another ablative absolute, right? So with the Sequani unwilling, however, they were not able to go, non poterant ire. So it's saying unless that the Sequani are on board, they're not able to go anywhere, okay? You have Dumnorix, apud Sequanos, plurimum potest, et Helvetis est amicus. So you have Dumnorix among the Sequani, apud Sequanos. So among the Sequani, he is the most powerful, plurimum potest, right? He's the most powerful. And he is an amicus, he is a friend to the Helvetii, or you can even say he is friendly to the Helvetii, right? However you want to take it. So this is Dumnorix again, we saw him. He's the one that was part of that conspiracy. So he's friendly, okay? So then you have Helvetii sperant, dum nordige duce, sequanos sibi iter daturos esse. So the Helvetii are hoping, sperant, it's an indirect statement. They're hoping that, you have the ablative absolute here, dum nordige duce, with Dumnorix being leader, right, with Dumnorix as the leader, they hope that the Sequani, there's our accusative that's functioning as the subject, the Sequani would give, daturos esse is a future infinitive, that they would give to them a journey, right? Meaning pass, right? Let us through. With you as the leader, we'll make it through. And then you have the last line, non frustra sperant, nam sequani Helvetios ire patiuntur. Okay, so they did not hope, sperant, in vain, frustra. So this worked out. For the Sequani patiuntur, they allowed the Helvetii, Helvetios ire, to go. So this works out, and they're going to take that northern route. So there's a lot in this chapter of unpacking ablative absolutes, deponent verbs. There's a lot going on, but hopefully you were able to follow this. Try to really focus in on the grammar as you go through the story, because again, there's a good dose of deponent verbs and ablative absolutes, and it's a really good way to get the practice on them, recognizing them, translating all these good things. If you have any questions on the translation, feel free to put it in the comments below. I'm more than happy to help you out. If you need anything explained, just let me know. Otherwise, keep practicing, right? The more you practice, the easier it gets. Keep trying the read and reread method, and you're looking for a point where you're able to read this whole story and understand everything. And as long as you know what you came up with is roughly matching what I'm saying here, again, not that my translation is perfect, but at least you can feel comfortable that you're ready to move on. Good luck.